Welcome to those who are here. I'm just going to give it one more moment and then we'll get started. All right, well, my clock says noon, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Welcome again. We're so glad you could join us today. My name is Liz Hill, and my co-host and technical support is Carrie McLean. We both work in the CU Boulder's Ombuds Office, which, as many of you probably know by now, offers confidential, impartial, and off-the-record consultations and services for all faculty, students, and staff. And we recognize that we're all living in some challenging times right now, and we all have competing interests. So thank you again. We're thrilled you chose to join us today. I am going to go ahead and turn off my video until the Q&A period, so I will be back then. All right, so some logistics to get us started. You are in listen and view only mode. We may use some polls and ask questions throughout the presentation, and we do this in an effort to hear from you, to learn from each other, and of course to keep you engaged. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and take this opportunity to open up that chat box in the lower toolbar of your Zoom browser. And this is what you'll use to respond to any questions that I may ask, as well as to ask questions of your own. And as you probably know by now using Zoom, your name does appear when you use that chat box function. And so while I'm presenting, Carrie will field any technical questions or issues that might come up, and we'll go ahead and park all the other ones until the end when we will have a question and answer period. If anyone has a specific situation they'd like to discuss, of course, you can contact us in the Ombuds office and schedule a separate consultation for that, as we do aim to keep these at about 30 minutes to provide you some bite-sized amounts of information and get you back to your day. We are recording this session in an effort to reach as many people as possible, including anyone who is unable to attend at this time. And please know, as always, we will send a follow-up email after today's session, and that'll include links to any references we make, as well as a handout summarizing today's topic and a feedback survey. So please, if you have a moment, let us know how these are working for you and what we can do to improve them. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So this is part 2 of what I'm dubbing our negotiation series. And as some of you might recall, back on May 26th, I provided a high-level view of 10 different negotiation tips and strategies. So if you don't remember that session or you didn't see it, feel free to visit that on this recorded and on YouTube, and you can get that recording link simply by going to our website, going to Lunch and Learns, and clicking on the session title. And so today our focus is interests and positions. We're taking a deeper dive into that specific topic. Out of curiosity, and we'll see if my mouse will cooperate with me here. Out of curiosity, how many of you actually did attend that May 26th program, Negotiation, a Recipe for Success? If you just take a moment and let me know how many of you here were there, that'll help me gauge a little bit better. Okay, so okay, I love that. I'm glad I put that. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember it either, but no, I was there. But it looks like it's split. Okay, so half of you are here. So please know, if you weren't there, feel free to refer back to that recording. Nothing that we talk about today requires that you attended that, but just so you understand the context, this is a deeper dive into one of the 10 negotiation tips that we talked about on May 26th. Okay, so thanks for doing that. All right. Hope I should share the results with you. Okay. All right, thanks so much for doing that. All right, so the word negotiation, and as we talked about in that May 26th program, it often conjures up notions or images for people of these really intense, high-stake, discussions, whether it's international diplomacy or multi-million-dollar business deals, or maybe buying a house. Yeah, so, but as we previously discussed, that's not all it is, right? Negotiation also includes those everyday interactions when you're attempting to reach an agreement. For instance, if you've haggled with a teenager who wants to use your family car, or you've deliberated with your partner over where to go on vacation, or maybe you just tried to figure out who's going to pick up the kids from school, you've negotiated. So simply put, negotiation is a process by which two or more people seek to advance their individual interests by agreeing on a desired action. And the first rule of negotiation in our focus for today is to really understand what this idea of interest means, both your own interest as well as the other person's interest. And this isn't as easy as it sounds. And so people negotiate, to get what they want. And they often fail to reveal what it is they actually need. And instead they make demands and stake out positions and then try to impose those positions on the other person. And unfortunately, this sometimes prevents them reaching any kind of viable agreement. So let's just touch on what exactly are these ideas of positions and interests. A position is a specific viewpoint. It's what I say I want. For example, in a divorce, one partner might assert they want the house, or at work, someone might state they want a particular role, job, position, right? Or maybe they want to start a project a month early. So the interest is the reason for the viewpoint. It's what I or you or whoever's involved really needs and why we need it. It's those intangible motivations that lead us to our position, which is basically a conclusion or a judgment. It's our underlying hopes, our concerns, and our needs. And in the divorce example that I just mentioned, an interest for wanting the house might be something like they like the location of where the house is for one reason or another, or they love the garden, right, that they've cultivated for the past 10 years. And in the work example that I gave, the interest might be wanting more responsibility, wanting higher status, wanting more autonomy or recognition. Perhaps it's wanting a higher salary. So in regard, and then of course, in the project I mentioned, wanting to start the project a month early, perhaps really the underlying interest there is perhaps this person has had issues meeting deadlines in the past, or knows that there's obstacles that have to be overcome, and they really just want to make sure they can finish on time. So that's really the underlying interest, is being able to finish on time. And here we use, I'm just going to just refer to the slide real quick. The positions and interests is what we call the iceberg theory, and you may have seen this in different contexts, but the positions are what we see above the surface, what we say we want. We're often very clear about what our positions are. It's those underlying interests right below the surface that we keep hidden, and those are what we really need to address. That's what we really want to find solutions to meet those needs. Okay, so the problem is when people state their positions, they don't reveal the interests and the needs behind those positions or under those positions. And that causes other people to make assumptions. And as we all know from being human beings in life, assumptions are often incorrect. And so we may be negotiating for outcomes or solutions that really don't meet the needs of the other person or our own if we haven't really done that self-exploration. And this can create a win-lose, or what maybe you've heard, a zero-sum game. And that really doesn't produce good agreements because, one, you're neglecting to understand what's really driving the other person. And in doing that, you're missing the opportunity to find solutions that are truly going to meet those needs, as well as your own needs. And when we get stuck in positions, it can become more of a competitive negotiation where we're stuck in that one position, it's that or nothing, right? And we dig our heels in deeper, and then it becomes competitive, right? We're just at it to win, to get what we want, and egos get involved, and it gets much more complicated. And it can, as I mentioned, make people dig further into those positions, which fosters stubbornness, right? And that in other behaviors, of course, can harm relationships. And often the people who are negotiating do have a relationship, right? There's more to what's going on between these two people than just this one conversation, or this one negotiation. So that's an important factor we want to make sure we're considering. Okay, so let me stop there for a moment. Use the chat box. Share some of the common positions that you hear or see people taking in the workplace. So if you've been in conversation, you know, what are some things when you're in a negotiating conversation that come up as people's positions in the workplace? Go ahead and put those in the chat box. So with the example I used, you know, I want a raise, or I want that position, or I want to work from home, and maybe you got that wish. Or I want, you know, those are the positions. Okay, I see some coming in now. Flexible work time, yes. I need something done by X date, right? Oh yeah, I want my professor to stop bullying me. Yes, Jerry. I want vacation X week, right? Grace, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Yes. Okay, very good. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so the converse, right, is when we start defining problems in terms of the underlying interests. And it's often possible to get more creative, right, and to find a solution which satisfies both parties when you start getting into this. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Because the individuals involved attempt to identify why they want what they want. And then they can devise mutually beneficial resolutions. So focusing on interests helps the individuals in conflict uncover the hidden problems and focus on what's important to them. Their concerns, their values, the needs, their motivations, hidden expectations, goals, unresolved issues, the list could go on, right? So we're trying to understand what those are. So to do this, right, there's a couple of things you have to focus on, and a couple of them are there on the slide, and I'm going to elaborate a bit here. So to identify, understand, and deal with everyone's underlying interests, you must be clear about your own interests, of course, but you also have to ask why they hold that position. Why not some other possible position, right? Why is it that position that they're making so important to them? And discuss these interests together, looking forward to the desired solution rather than focusing on past events. Understand that the interests will then help you understand what their real goals are, which allows you to open up and have better possible solutions and agreements. So you're trying to gather, right, as much information as possible and create as many options as possible that focus clearly on all the interests involved, and also being flexible, right? Being open-minded, remaining open to different proposals and different positions. And truly, negotiations, I think you'll find, are much more manageable when they're framed in terms of underlying interest, because now you have more information to work with. It's just not just that one position. You have, maybe there's other options to satisfy all these underlying needs and desires and motivations that weren't formally disclosed, right? And this is also known as, you may have heard people talk about this in other trainings or just in life in general, as expanding the pie, creating more options to work with, okay? So you're shifting the conversation into an interest-based conversation. So let's use the chat box again. What are some basic interests you might see in the workplace? And go ahead and use the position that you used earlier, and then think about what might be the interests underlying that position. I want to work a flexible schedule. It will help me be more productive. Okay, so productivity is the underlying interest. You want to be productive. And so then the conversation may in turn into, what are some, you know, if the boss is saying, no, we can't have, you know, a flexible work schedule, it at least offers the idea of, well, what else could we do to help you be more productive, Katie, right? If that's what's most important to you. Professional recognition, right? Again, while that role or that position might not be available for one reason or another, what are some other ways we can give you some professional recognition? See how it broadens the conversation, and we can start talking about other things and really do some brainstorming. Family concerns, absolutely. These are all going to be important hidden interests that people may have not previously discussed or disclosed. Jerry says, listening to my questions instead of assuming I'm stupid. Right. So, you know, so maybe it's a conversation around how you communicate and how, when you're in conversation, you get to speak uninterrupted so that you're really heard, right? So that someone's not assuming what you're saying. Okay, so these are all great. Thank you so much, Courtney, Gwen, thank you. Okay, good. Let's keep going. I want to make sure we get time for your questions as well. So I already said ask, right, is one of the things, but that's really, I would say, the key to moving from that positions conversation to an interest-based negotiation conversation. You need to get genuinely curious. So if possible, you want to use what and how questions to get to that why, right? And I caution you, and many of you may know this already, I caution you in why, when you're asking, if you are going to use why as your question, to really watch your tone, because why can be deemed or perceived as like a challenge, and you may create defensiveness, which of course is not your goal here. You're trying to get a collaborative, cooperative conversation. So if possible, think about how you might frame that why question into a what or a how question. And that'll help you get to the why without saying, well, why do you want that? Why is that important to you? Why do you care? You know, the what and how helps us identify what we want and how we might achieve it. It's a very forward-focused conversation. So, you know, whenever possible, if you can reframe it that way, great. So for example, let me give you an example. So instead of why do you want X, right? Why do you want flex time? You know, you could say, what is it about flex time that is so important to you, right? And I saw in the chat different questions, right? Family balance, picking up kids from school, being productive, right? Or you might say, how would having a flex schedule improve your life, right? And again, the same kind of responses might come out, but see how that then gets to those underlying interests, okay? It helps dig a little deeper. So as our friend Mick Jagger might say, you can't always get what you want, but you get what you need. All right, let's look at an anecdote here. This is a story, The Orange Dilemma, and you may have heard this before, so bear with me. Two children each want the orange, okay, the last one left in the fruit bowl. And it's late in the day and the grocery stores are closed. Purchasing another orange is just not an option. Their mother did not know what to do. Should she give the orange to one child? Well, that would leave one child happy and the other child unhappy. Should she cut the orange in two? Well, that might leave each child happy, but then again, maybe not. So the wise mother asked some questions. She helped the children articulate their respective interests. She learned that one child wanted the pulp of the orange to make orange juice. The other child wanted the rind of the orange for a science project. Once each child's interest was uncovered, the solution to the problem was actually very simple. And the mother was able to find a way to serve both their interests and make both children happy. So here we see, it's a very simple example, I agree. However, it makes the point, right? Each child is taking the position they want the orange, that's their position. And each child's true interest in the orange was very different, right? One making orange juice, the other developing a science project. So identifying those different interests led to an obvious solution that satisfied everybody involved in that particular negotiation. Okay, so this is the crux, right, of negotiation, is surfacing these interests. So let's go ahead to another story, and this will be one of the links that I'll provide in my follow-up email, so you have the full article that this came from. But this is a story about how two sisters could share a diamond ring, and it's by Jeswald Salacuse from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And so I'm going to read this to you, and while I'm reading it, I want you to think about each sister's position and interest, because there will be a series of questions, and then we're going to use our chat box again. All right, so here we go. A wealthy man died and left all his property to be divided equally between his two daughters, Janet and Claire. All went smoothly until they came to the old man's ring, a diamond ring that he had worn most of his life. Both daughters wanted it, and each justified her position on a principle. Janet pointed to the fact that she had taken care of their father in his final illness. Claire claimed he had promised her the ring years before. Their positions seemed irreconcilable, and relations between the two sisters grew tense. Finally, in frustration, Janet asked Claire a key question. Why do you want the ring? Claire replied, Because it has a beautiful diamond. I thought I'd make a pendant out of it. Janet responded, I want it because it reminds me of our father. Once the two sisters realized that their underlying interests were not necessarily incompatible, they explored solutions to their common problem. They finally agreed that Claire would have the diamond replaced with Janet's birthstone, return the ring to Janet, and keep the diamond. This was an example of a win-win negotiation, one that allowed both sisters to satisfy their individual underlying interests. Okay, so here are some questions I want you to ask yourself. And you don't have to make full statements, but go ahead and use the chat box and just jot down Claire's position, Janet's position. What was Claire's interest? What was Janet's interest? And did they have any possible common interests? So go ahead and take a moment. We're at about 12:20, so I'll give you a minute or so, but go ahead and answer those questions in the chat box. Remind us who was whom. Thank you. Yeah. So Claire and Janet are the sisters. So Claire wants the diamond, and Janet wants the ring to remember her dad. Right. So I see people saying they want the ring. Right. That's their position. They want the ring. Exactly. And then when we dug a little deeper, right? Why do they each want the ring? Why did Claire want the ring? Right. Janet was sentimental. Thanks, Kathleen. Right, they both want the ring, yes. Right, but Grace has an interest one, she wants to make a pendant with the diamond. Right, thank you, Grace. That was Claire. How about Janet? What did Janet want? She wanted the reminder of her dad. Okay, Grace, thank you. They want the same, that's the whys are different. Exactly, Eva, yes. Yes, Janet's interest is sentimental, right. And so they're able to accomplish that. So I think you guys get the idea. That they both want the ring, yes, but they want it for different reasons, right? Claire wants to make a pendant with a diamond. Janet just wants the ring for sentimental value. So they were able to replace the diamond with Janet's birthstone. Janet gets the ring to remember her dad. Claire gets the diamond to make a pendant, and they both are satisfied. Yes. Okay. Good job. Thank you. Okay. So the moral of these stories is what we've been talking about, right? Being aware of the values and the priorities of the people involved. Keep the free flow of information. Keep asking questions. Get as much information as you can, so then you can really identify what all those interests are and determine what might work for not only you, but for the other person. And ideally, in a win-win negotiation, you would address, if not all, many of the needs and interests of everyone involved. Okay, so before I turn over to questions, a friendly reminder of how to reach our office. We are currently open and scheduling consults by phone and Zoom, and we encourage you to follow us on Twitter and follow our blog on Ombuds. And be sure to register for our next session scheduled. It's actually a special session scheduled for Friday, June 19th. It's Kirsi Alina, Professor Donna Mejia. They're going to dialogue about how to stay in conversation about racism and what you can do. So without further ado, let me turn over to you. So we spent today, because I know people are going to have to start hopping off, which is why I wanted to do that real quick. But it's your turn now. Use the chat box. What came up for you as I'm sharing? And thank you, Carrie, for putting some of those resources in the chat box for everyone. I will have a follow-up email as well. But as we discussed interests and positions, what came up for you? Did you learn something new? Did you have further questions? Do you think this could be useful going forward in your negotiations? I want to hear from you. All right, I don't see anything coming in, so let me ask you a question. Oh, good, thanks, here comes some. All right, let me look here real quick. Now I gotta scroll back up. I have two screens and my mouse keeps getting lost. Okay, so Eva says, I think we are taught to start with positions. Yeah, I think that's very true, right? And this isn't a judgment. It's not necessarily right or wrong. Everyone's gonna have their own styles, but you're right. We're taught to ask for what we want. And if we can get it, great, right? That makes it very easy. Oh, here, let me go put my video back up too for this question and answer. And if we can get it simply by asking, great. The issue, of course, is oftentimes it's not that easy, right? And so we have to come up with other options. And so that's where the interest can really be helpful. Laura says, the examples and guidance in the session do not address power structures. Yes. Negotiating a physical object between children is simply not the same as asking a manager for a raise. And what about another party? Sure. And these techniques, and so Laura, I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. And the same techniques can be used. So let's just use your manager for a raise. You're explaining to your manager you want a raise, and you're going to have all your underlying interest for what that means to you, why you feel like you deserve it, why you feel like you've earned it, you know, and all the different reasons of how that's going to help you. You know, going forward, right? What's important about the raise to you, and how does that help improve your life? You know, you can still use that same kind of structure, even in a power. Now, the deference in that conversation might be a little different, and Crucial Conversations is actually a great course for these kinds of conversations, especially dealing with power dynamics, where, you know, you have your facts, and then you have you know, what it means to you, and then you have questions. You're engaging people in dialogue. And what about when the other party is not? Yes, and so Laura also asked, you know, what about when the other party isn't transparent about their intentions? I think you keep asking questions. Try to really engage that person in dialogue, and you could again go back to some of the crucial conversation skills. AMP comes to mind. You know, you've asked, they're not being forthcoming. Maybe you mirror. You know, you say, you know, so you're saying that you want this, and I'm still having a hard time understanding, you know, what it is about this in particular position, you know, this particular position that's so important to you. Can you help me understand, right? Getting genuinely curious, to, and sharing your intention, right? Why you're asking. Like, I'm not trying, you know, you can say, I'm not trying to challenge, I'm trying to understand, right? I'm trying to understand, you know, why this is a problem, or how we can move forward, or, you know, things like that. So I don't know, Laura, does that help answer your questions? And I'm happy to talk more about power structures, and especially with negotiating raises. And on LinkedIn, there's some great videos on exactly that, negotiating raises. And we talked a little bit about on the 26th as well. So maybe watch that video, maybe that will help you. What was your comment about imposing positions? Ooh, Renee, now I got to remember. I think what you're remembering and what you're asking about is in the beginning, I talked about oftentimes we come into, to Eva's point, we come into a negotiated conversation with a position of what we want. And then we try to compel and convince that person to give us what we want, right? Without really digging to find out, okay, are there other possibilities here that might still serve whatever interests that have brought me to the conclusion that I want X, right? Well, what I really need is Y and Z. So maybe X isn't the only answer. Maybe there are other answers that will satisfy that. And that's where we talk about, you know, you don't want to just try to slam the position, you know, to the other person, or demand only that, because it doesn't allow for dialogue. It doesn't allow for conversation, negotiation. You're going to get stuck. You're going to get stuck in that position. Does that help? Are any of my answers helping? I'm not getting it. I don't see any feedback, or maybe I can't see it. Make a strong showing. Okay, I'm not sure. I think you're just adding to the commentary, which is helpful. Thank you. Kathleen says a bit of a dynamic may come into play if your boss takes a position and your query comes across as insubordinate. Okay, yep, the response would be because I said so. Right, and sure, that is a risk. There's always risks in any conversation, in any negotiation. And I would say, again, as long as you're being clear, and we do have actually a webinar on intentions, like being very clear with your intentions. If you do state your intentions up front, especially if you know your boss might have that kind of a reaction, you know, just because I said so, you know, stop being insubordinate or whatever, then you're going to want to say, look, I'm asking just for clarity and for understanding. I'm not, you know, I defer to you, right? I respect that you have the final say here, and I'm trying to understand. And I'm wondering if there's any wiggle room here. wonder if there's any room to really explore this further. And yes, of course, you know, if they are in a position of power and they have a final say, you might run into that at times. The key here is to you know, have some skills to at least try to prompt more dialogue and to have more negotiation. It takes time to ask these questions to learn about person's interests and then to consider creative middle grounds. Yes, thank you, Courtney. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's actually going to be, I think, I don't know if it's next time or the time after, I'm doing a session on preparing for your negotiation. And that's exactly the crux of part of that session is this takes time. This might not be a 5-minute conversation in the hallway. Preparing for negotiations takes time, doing your homework and making sure you have all the data and concrete information as much as possible. Objective criteria is the word I was looking for. We'll talk more about that in another session. But yeah, it might take time and it might take multiple conversations. You might have to come back and revisit. Thanks, Renee. Thanks, Kathleen. Okay, and I realize we're at 12:30. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if people have other questions, or if I didn't answer your question and you want to talk more, of course, you can call and schedule a conversation too. But for those of you who need to go, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you found something valuable.